Zach blasts Nico for the Turn 1 incident. Max Verstappen takes another dominant victory, and the championship is fully on now. Did you just witness the most explosive Formula One controversy of the season? Because what happened at the US Grand Prix Sprint has sent shockwaves through the paddock, and McLaren CEO Zak Brown is absolutely furious. We're talking about a collision that wiped out both championship contenders in one devastating moment, and the fallout is getting messy. Picture this. You're leading the championship fight. Your team has the fastest cars on the grid, and you're sitting pretty with both drivers starting in the top 3 positions. Then, in the blink of an eye, both your million-dollar race cars are scattered across the tarmac. Your drivers are walking away from twisted metal, and your title hopes have just taken a massive hit. That's exactly what McLaren experienced, and Zak Brown was not having it. Let me set the scene for you. The United States Grand Prix Sprint was shaping up to be an absolute thriller. We had the 3 championship contenders occupying the front row, Max Verstappen on pole position, Lando Norris right behind him in second, and Oscar Piastri starting third. This was McLaren's golden opportunity to strike back in the title fight, with both their drivers perfectly positioned to challenge Verstappen from the very first corner. But as we all know in Formula One, the best laid plans can go up in smoke faster than you can say lights out. As the field charged into Turn 1 at the Circuit of the Americas, disaster struck. Oscar Piastri made his move, attempting to sweep around the outside of his teammate Norris before tucking back in for a better exit angle. It was a calculated racing move that we've seen work countless times before. However, there was one major problem. The gap Piastri was aiming for was already occupied by Nico Hülkenberg and his Sauber. The contact was inevitable and catastrophic. Hülkenberg's car made contact with Piastri's left rear tire, launching the McLaren into the air on 2 wheels, like something out of an action movie. But this wasn't Hollywood. This was championship points, disappearing in real time. The physics were brutal and unforgiving. Piastri, now completely out of control, went careening straight into his unsuspecting teammate. Both McLaren drivers were eliminated from the sprint before they'd even completed the first corner. Years of engineering excellence, millions of dollars in development, and crucial championship points all vanished in mere seconds. Zak Brown's reaction was swift and absolutely scathing. Speaking to Sky Sports, the McLaren CEO didn't mince words about what he'd witnessed. He called it terrible and made it crystal clear that neither of his drivers bore any responsibility for what had transpired. Instead, he directed his fury at what he described as amateur hour driving from certain competitors at the front of the pack. When pressed for specifics, Brown doubled down on his criticism of Hülkenberg. He emphasized that the veteran German driver had no business being in the position that led to the collision, describing how Hülkenberg drove directly into Piastri's left rear tire. For a driver with Hülkenberg's extensive experience, we're talking about 244 Grand Prix starts. This kind of incident was completely unacceptable in Brown's view. The McLaren team principal Andrea Stella echoed these sentiments, though his criticism came wrapped in more diplomatic language. Stella expressed disappointment that experienced drivers weren't exercising more prudence in such critical moments. His point was simple but powerful. Get through the first corner cleanly, avoid damaging your competitors, and then engage in wheel-to-wheel combat. It's racing 101. Yet somehow, it didn't happen. What makes this incident even more frustrating for McLaren is the timing. Both Norris and Piastri have been locked in an intense championship battle with Verstappen all season long. Every single point matters when you're fighting for the title, and losing both drivers in a single Pribes incident represents a massive missed opportunity. While their cars were being towed away, Verstappen was free to cruise to sprint victory, extending his championship advantage even further. The immediate aftermath showed the stark reality of motorsport's unforgiving nature. Norris was forced to retire his car on the spot, while Piastri managed to limp back to the pits before parking his damaged McLaren due to suspension issues. Both drivers were left as spectators for the remainder of the sprint, watching helplessly as their title rival accumulated valuable points. From a technical standpoint, McLaren caught a small break. The damage appeared to be primarily limited to suspension components, rather than more expensive parts like the power unit or gearbox. This meant their mechanics had a fighting chance to repair both cars in time for qualifying later that day. However, the psychological impact and lost championship points couldn't be so easily fixed. The broader implications of this incident extend beyond just one sprint race result. It highlights the razor-thin margins in modern Formula One, where a single moment of contact can destroy months of preparation and development work. It also raises questions about racecraft and experience levels among the current grid, particularly when veteran drivers find themselves at the center of such controversial incidents. Looking at the championship standings, this collision couldn't have come at a worse time for McLaren's title ambitions. With Verstappen taking maximum points from the sprint while both McLaren drivers scored 0, the gap at the top of the standings grew significantly. In a season where every point could prove decisive, losing 18 potential points in one fell swoop is devastating. As the dust settled and teams prepared for the remainder of the weekend, one thing became crystal clear: this incident would be talked about for weeks to come, and the tension between McLaren and Hülkenberg was far from over. Picture this. You're battling for a Formula One championship, sitting just 22 points behind your title rival, and then in a split second, everything goes wrong. That's exactly what happened to Lando Norris at the US Grand Prix Sprint, and his reaction tells us everything about the pressure these drivers face when millions are watching. What started as a promising Saturday morning in Austin turned into absolute chaos within seconds of the green flag. Both McLaren drivers found themselves eliminated before they could even complete the first lap, and the fallout has everyone talking about who's really to blame when racing incidents spiral out of control. The drama began at the notorious first corner at Circuit of the Americas, where races are often won and lost before they've truly begun. Norris had qualified second on the grid for the sprint race, with his teammate Oscar Piastri right behind him in third. Everything seemed perfectly set up for McLaren to maximize their points haul in this crucial championship battle. But motorsport has a cruel way of humbling even the best-laid plans. As the field charged toward turn 1, Piastri managed to get a better launch off the line than his teammate. This put him right alongside Norris as they approached the corner, setting up what should have been a standard racing maneuver between teammates. Here's where things get interesting from a tactical perspective. Piastri attempted what's called a cutback move, trying to position himself on the inside of his teammate to gain the advantage. It's a perfectly legal racing move that we see dozens of times every race weekend. However, the problem wasn't with what Piastri was trying to do, but rather with what was happening around him. Enter Nico Hülkenberg, the experienced German driver who found himself caught in an impossible situation. With Fernando Alonso's Aston Martin on his left side and the McLaren on his right, Hülkenberg had nowhere to go. This is where racing becomes less about individual skill and more about the physics of 20 cars trying to occupy the same piece of tarmac. The contact between Hülkenberg and Piastri created a domino effect that would make even the most seasoned racing fans wince. Piastri's car was launched into the air, and gravity did the rest. His machine came crashing down directly onto Norris's left rear wheel, ending both McLaren drivers' races in the most spectacular and devastating fashion possible. Norris's immediate reaction was telling. Standing in the paddock with his race suit still on and frustration written across his face, he delivered his verdict with the kind of raw honesty that makes Formula One so compelling. He emphasized that he did absolutely nothing wrong in the incident, describing himself as simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time when chaos erupted around him. This perspective reveals something fascinating about modern Formula One racing. Despite all the advanced technology, sophisticated strategies, and millions of dollars in development, sometimes a driver's fate comes down to pure chance. Norris found himself eliminated from a crucial championship fight, not through any mistake of his own, but because of a chain reaction that started several cars away from him. The aftermath was equally dramatic. McLaren team principal Andrea Stella didn't mince words when describing his disappointment with the incident. He called out what he saw as a lack of prudence from experienced drivers, suggesting that veterans of the sport should know better than to create such dangerous situations in opening corners. This criticism cuts to the heart of a broader debate in Formula One about aggressive racing versus smart racing. While fans love to see wheel-to-wheel action, there's an ongoing discussion about when pushing the limits becomes counterproductive, especially when championship points are at stake. The timing couldn't have been worse for McLaren's championship ambitions. With Max Verstappen taking victory in the sprint race, the Dutchman closed the gap to both McLaren drivers in the standings. What should have been an opportunity to gain ground in the title fight instead became a missed opportunity that could prove costly as the season reaches its climax. Adding another layer to this story is the context of recent McLaren teammate dynamics. Just weeks earlier in Singapore, Norris had made an aggressive move on Piastri that the team later determined was inappropriate. Internal discussions had concluded that Norris would face unspecified consequences for that incident, creating an interesting backdrop to this latest collision. The irony wasn't lost on observers that after facing criticism for being too aggressive with his teammate, Norris found himself eliminated through no fault of his own in a completely unrelated incident. Sometimes, racing delivers these cruel twists of fate that remind everyone involved just how unpredictable this sport can be. Team CEO Zak Brown's reaction was perhaps the most colorful, describing the entire incident as amateur hour while completely absolving his drivers of any responsibility. This public defense of his drivers shows how teams must balance honest assessment with protecting their assets in the court of public opinion. Looking ahead, this incident serves as a stark reminder of how quickly championship battles can shift in Formula One. One moment of chaos can undo months of careful preparation and strategic planning, leaving drivers and teams to pick up the pieces and refocus on the challenges ahead. For Norris, this experience represents both the heartbreak and the reality of Formula One racing, where excellence and misfortune often collide in the most unexpected ways. What happens when split-second decisions go wrong in Formula One? Just ask Lance Stroll, who found himself at the center of a controversial collision that's got the entire paddock talking. The Circuit of the Americas delivered drama once again during the sprint race, but not the kind anyone was hoping for. While Max Verstappen was cruising toward victory up front, a battle brewing just outside the points-paying positions would end in disaster for two drivers and spark a heated debate about racing standards. Picture this: 19 laps of intense competition, cars fighting wheel-to-wheel for every precious championship point. Lance Stroll, piloting his green Aston Martin, spotted an opportunity as he closed in on Esteban Ocon's Haas. The Canadian driver had been hunting for points all weekend, and with Turn 1 approaching fast, he saw his chance to make a move that could change his entire race. But sometimes in Formula One, opportunity and disaster are separated by mere millimeters and milliseconds. As the two cars approached the first corner, Stroll committed to an inside overtake. The problem was, he was starting this maneuver from too far back. In the split second it takes to make these calculations at over 180 miles per hour, Stroll misjudged his braking point. The mathematics of racing are unforgiving. Too much speed, not enough track, and physics takes over. The contact was inevitable. Both cars sustained significant damage, their races ending in a cloud of debris and disappointment. But the drama was far from over. As Stroll climbed from his damaged machine, television cameras caught him raising his hand toward Ocon, a gesture that seemed to acknowledge his mistake and offer an apology to his fellow competitor. However, gestures don't erase consequences in Formula One. The FIA stewards launched an immediate investigation, reviewing every angle of the incident with surgical precision. Their conclusion was swift and decisive. Stroll was wholly at fault for the collision. The punishment came in two parts, reflecting the severity of the incident. First, a 5-place grid penalty that would be applied after qualifying for the main Grand Prix. In Formula One terms, this is significant. 5 grid positions can mean the difference between points and going home empty-handed. But the stewards didn't stop there. 2 penalty points were added to Stroll's super license, bringing his total to 7 points accumulated over the past 12 months. This might sound minor to casual fans, but in Formula One, penalty points are serious business. Accumulate 12 points in a rolling 12-month period, and a driver faces a race ban, a career-damaging consequence that no professional wants to face. The steward's official statement left no room for interpretation. They determined that Stroll's inside overtake attempt was poorly executed, with the Canadian driver misjudging the crucial breaking point that separates successful overtakes from dangerous collisions. Since neither driver finished the sprint race due to the incident, the standard time penalty was converted to the grid penalty format. But Stroll wasn't the only driver facing scrutiny that day. Oliver Bearman, Ocon's Haas teammate, found himself under investigation for a completely different type of incident. The British rookie had run off track while battling Kimi Antonelli's Mercedes, maintaining his position through what officials deemed an unfair advantage. Bearman received a 10-second time penalty during the race, which dropped him from a potential point-scoring position all the way down to 15th place when the checkered flag waved. However, unlike Stroll's situation, Bearman avoided penalty points on his license. The nature of his transgression, gaining an advantage by leaving the track, typically doesn't warrant the additional punishment of license points. This distinction proved crucial for Bearman, who was already walking a tightrope. With 10 penalty points on his license, just 2 more points would have triggered an automatic race ban, potentially derailing the young driver's promising career before it truly began. The broader implications of these incidents extend beyond individual driver penalties. They highlight the razor-thin margins that separate clean racing from costly mistakes in modern Formula One. Every decision made at speed carries enormous consequences, not just for championship points, but for careers, team morale, and millions of dollars in prize money. For Stroll, this incident adds another chapter to a career that's been marked by both genuine speed and persistent criticism. The Canadian driver has faced questions about his place on the grid throughout his Formula One journey, with some pointing to his father's ownership of the Aston Martin team as the primary reason for his continued employment. These latest penalty points only add fuel to that fire, giving critics fresh ammunition in debates about merit versus opportunity in Formula One's driver market. With his super license now carrying 7 penalty points, Stroll must navigate the remainder of the season carefully, knowing that one significant incident could trigger a race ban. The incident also serves as a reminder of how quickly fortunes can change in Formula One. One moment you're battling for points, calculating overtaking opportunities, and planning race strategy. The next moment, you're climbing from a damaged car, facing stewards' investigations, and explaining to your team how a promising race weekend turned into disappointment. As the Formula One circus prepares for the next race weekend, both Stroll and Bearman face the challenge of bouncing back from their respective setbacks. For Stroll, the grid penalty means starting further back in an already competitive midfield battle. For Bearman, the pressure of carrying 10 penalty points adds an extra layer of stress to every on-track decision. The message from the stewards is clear. In Formula One, accountability matters, and poor decisions carry real consequences that extend far beyond a single race weekend. What happens when one of Formula One's brightest stars completely loses his filter? Charles Leclerc just delivered the most savage takedown of his own team that we've seen all season, and the fallout is absolutely wild. Picture this. You're driving for the most prestigious team in motorsport history, Ferrari, and you've just qualified 10th for a sprint race. Most drivers would sugarcoat their disappointment, maybe throw in some diplomatic team speak about extracting maximum potential. Not Charles Leclerc. This guy went full nuclear on his own squad, and the racing world is still picking up the pieces. At the United States Grand Prix, Leclerc didn't just express frustration. He basically told the world that Ferrari has become a complete joke. His exact words, "Ferrari is so far behind now, and he'd be very surprised if they could find anything to make a significant improvement." That's not criticism, that's a public execution of your own team's reputation. But here's where it gets really spicy. According to reports from Italy, Leclerc's brutal honesty didn't exactly go down well with Ferrari's engineers. Can you imagine being in that garage right now? Your star driver just told international media that your car is basically hopeless, and everyone's watching to see how the team responds. The numbers don't lie, though, and they're absolutely devastating for Ferrari. The team that once dominated Formula One hasn't seen a podium in 5 consecutive races. 5 races. For a team with Ferrari's heritage and budget, that's not just disappointing, it's borderline catastrophic. They're sitting 3rd in the championship, a whopping 27 points behind Mercedes, and the gap seems to be growing every weekend. What makes this situation even more painful is the context. While Ferrari struggles to crack the top 10 in qualifying, teams like Sauber, who literally buy Ferrari's customer engines, are outperforming them. Nico Hülkenberg qualified 4th in a Sauber, making Ferrari look absolutely amateur by comparison. When your customer team is showing you up with your own engine, that's when you know something is seriously broken. Leclerc's teammate situation adds another layer of drama to this mess. Lewis Hamilton, who's joining Ferrari next season, also had a terrible qualifying session, ending up 8th and nearly a full second off the pace. Hamilton's reaction was equally telling. He described the car as very tough to drive, and admitted the performance gap felt like a mountain to climb. Having two world-class drivers struggle this badly with the same machinery isn't a coincidence. The really fascinating part is how Leclerc's comments reveal the deeper psychology of what's happening at Ferrari. This isn't just about one bad weekend or a minor setback. Leclerc specifically mentioned that McLaren, Red Bull, and Mercedes have converged at the front of the grid, leaving Ferrari behind. That's a driver who's watching his championship dreams evaporate in real time, and he's not going to pretend everything is fine. Think about the pressure Leclerc is under. He's 27 years old, driving for his dream team, and this should be his prime championship-winning window. Instead, he's stuck in a car that can barely crack the top 10. The psychological toll of that situation would break most people, but Leclerc's chosen to channel his frustration into these devastatingly honest public statements. What's particularly brutal about his latest comments is how specific and technical they were. Leclerc didn't just say the car was slow, he broke down exactly where they were losing time, mentioned setup issues with tire compounds, and essentially gave a masterclass in why Ferrari's engineering approach isn't working. That level of detailed criticism from your lead driver is unprecedented. The timing couldn't be worse for Ferrari either. With Hamilton joining next season and massive expectations for a championship push, having your current star driver publicly questioning the team's competence creates a narrative disaster. Sponsors, fans, and the media are all watching this implosion in real time. But here's what makes this story so compelling. Leclerc might actually be doing Ferrari a favor. Sometimes organizations need that harsh wake-up call. That moment when someone with credibility stands up and says the emperor has no clothes. Ferrari's been coasting on reputation and history for too long, and maybe Leclerc's brutal honesty is exactly what they need to trigger real change. The question now is whether Ferrari will respond with genuine improvements or whether they'll try to manage Leclerc's media appearances more carefully. Either way, this story is far from over. When your star driver goes this public with his criticism, it usually means one of two things. Either dramatic changes are coming, or a very messy divorce is on the horizon. Picture this. You're flying down the main straight at the Circuit of the Americas, wheel to wheel with another driver, both of you pushing for every tenth of a second. Then, in one split moment, everything goes wrong. That's exactly what happened to Lance Stroll during the US Grand Prix sprint race. And the consequences are about to shake up his entire weekend. What started as an ambitious overtaking attempt has now turned into a costly mistake that's sending ripple effects through the Formula One paddock. We're diving deep into one of the most controversial incidents of the weekend, and trust me, this story has layers you haven't heard about yet. The drama unfolded during Saturday's 19-lap sprint race at the Circuit of the Americas. Lance Stroll, driving for Aston Martin, was locked in battle with Haas driver Esteban Ocon just outside the points-paying positions. Both drivers were pushing hard, knowing that even a single point in sprint races can make the difference between a good weekend and a disappointing one. As they approached Turn 1, arguably one of the most challenging overtaking spots on the entire calendar, Stroll saw his opportunity. The Canadian driver positioned his car on the inside line, attempting to capitalize on what appeared to be a gap. But here's where things went catastrophically wrong. Stroll misjudged his braking point completely. Instead of threading the needle through a tight space, he came in way too hot, carrying far more speed than the corner could handle. The physics were unforgiving. His Aston Martin slammed into Ocon's Haas, sending both cars spinning and effectively ending their sprint races before they could even think about fighting for points. The immediate aftermath was telling. As Stroll climbed out of his damaged car, he raised his hand toward Ocon in what appeared to be a gesture of apology. Even he knew instantly that this was his fault. But gestures don't undo damage, and the stewards were already taking notes. Now, here's where this incident becomes really expensive for Stroll. The FIA stewards didn't just slap him on the wrist and send him on his way. They came down hard with a double punishment that's going to hurt both his immediate prospects and his long-term standing in the sport. First, they handed him a 5-place grid penalty for Sunday's main Grand Prix. That means no matter where he qualifies, he'll automatically start 5 positions further back on the grid. In a sport where track position is absolutely crucial, especially at a circuit like Austin where overtaking can be challenging, this penalty could effectively ruin his entire weekend. But wait. It gets worse. The stewards also added 2 penalty points to his super license, bringing his total to 7 points over the past 12 months. Now, you might be thinking, so what? Well, here's the kicker that makes this really serious. In Formula 1, if a driver accumulates 12 penalty points within a 12-month rolling period, they face an automatic 1-race ban. Stroll is now sitting at 7 points, just 5 away from missing an entire race weekend. That's closer than you want to be, especially when we're heading into the final stretch of the season where every point matters for both the drivers' and constructors' championships. The stewards' official verdict was crystal clear and left no room for interpretation. They stated that Stroll attempted an inside overtake, but completely misjudged his braking point, colliding with Ocon's car. Most importantly, they determined that Stroll was wholly at fault, meaning there was no shared responsibility for this incident. This wasn't a racing incident, where both drivers could share some blame. This wasn't a case of hard but fair racing that went slightly wrong. This was a clear-cut case of driver error, and the stewards treated it as such. The collision itself highlights one of the most challenging aspects of modern Formula 1 racing. These drivers are operating at the absolute limit of both their car's capabilities and their own physical and mental limits. The margin for error is microscopic, especially during sprint weekends where there's less practice time to get comfortable with the car and track conditions. But what makes this incident particularly frustrating for both drivers and their teams is the timing. Sprint races offer fewer opportunities to score points compared to traditional race weekends. Every position matters exponentially more, making mistakes like this incredibly costly. For Haas, this collision was particularly painful because they're fighting tooth and nail in the Constructors' Championship. Every point they lose due to incidents like this could potentially cost them millions of dollars in prize money at the end of the season. The broader implications of this incident extend beyond just one weekend in Austin. Stroll's penalty point situation puts him in a precarious position for the remaining races. He'll need to drive with extra caution, knowing that another significant incident could trigger that automatic race ban. This creates an interesting psychological dynamic. Will Stroll become overly cautious, potentially hurting his performance? Or will he maintain his aggressive driving style and risk crossing that 12-point threshold? It's a delicate balance that could define the rest of his season. Looking at the bigger picture, incidents like this remind us why Formula 1 has implemented the penalty point system. It's designed to encourage clean, professional driving while still allowing for the hard racing that fans love to see. The system works because it creates real consequences for repeated poor judgment. As we head into the main Grand Prix, Stroll will start his weekend already on the back foot. That 5-place grid penalty means he'll need to produce something special just to get back to where he might have qualified. In a sport where marginal gains matter enormously, giving away 5 grid positions before the race even begins is like spotting your opponents a significant head start. The US Grand Prix just got a lot more interesting, and Lance Stroll's weekend just got a whole lot harder.